Life Audio.
Hello, and welcome to the Confessions of a Christian Alcoholic podcast. I am your host, John Seidel. This is your home for real stories, radical vulnerability, and remarkable comebacks. In the end, this podcast is a place for the desperate, the downtrodden, the destitute, and especially the drunk. But it's also a place of hope and healing. I know that firsthand because I'm the Christian who became an alcoholic, not the other way around. Today, I've found sobriety after decades of struggling. But more importantly than finding sobriety, I found Jesus. My prayer is that as I interview people just like you and just like me, along with professionals in the fields of trauma, faith, and addiction recovery, you will find the peace that is available to you through Christ on the other side of whatever you're going through and whatever addiction that might be. Because let's face it, we're all addicted to something. So welcome. Let's get radically vulnerable as we explore what it looks like to be on this journey of messy sanctification. Welcome back to another Confessions of a Christian Alcoholic. I'm your host, John Seidel, as I said in the intro. Are you enjoying these episodes? I know I have a lot of fun recording them and having these conversations, but I'm curious to know what you think. You can go to christianalcoholic.com, fill out the form, and let me know. You can also apply there to be a guest on the show. I'd love to tell your story if you have a story of misordered and disordered drinking or anything, any type of addiction or just issue that has become chronic that's been slipping you up. So fill out the form there and let's talk. This week's episode is someone who I actually met who had reached out to me, like I'm telling you to do, and met her on Substack, where I publish the Veritas Daily, where I'm taking a little bit of a break over the summer, but I will be back publishing daily in the fall. And so we met there. She reached out, and I just got to know her and her story, and I had to share it with you. And her story is, I think, like a lot of people, where she started drinking very early in life, I think high school, and it just snowballed and turned into a monster from there. There were interventions, there was denial of problem, there was just all this stuff. And I think a lot of people will be able to resonate with her story. Just so you know, there's talk about, sexual issues, of eating disorder. And so I just want to give you a heads up on that, that's coming up. But I think you'll really enjoy this. It's a longer episode. Listen, I don't subscribe to the idea that these have to be 30 to 45 minutes. You can stop and pause them, listen to as much as you want. But if there's a story there, I'm going to chase it. And so I chased this story with Lisa, and we really just, it's like an opportunity for you to listen to a conversation we're having in the living room. But her story is so good, and there's so much she has to say, that we're going to do a part 2. And that will be coming next week. And that will focus more on her book and the actual practical tools and advice that she has in her book that will help you. Lisa is a PhD doctor, and she lives in Minnesota with her husband, Kevin. Her husband, Kevin, has an incredible story too. He will be a guest coming up on the podcast. So I'm excited to introduce you to him soon as well. So without further ado, Dr. Lisa Stanton. So, Lisa, why don't you just give a quick intro? I mean, I did the intro myself, before we started talking, but why don't you just kind of give a quick intro of who you are and where you are?
Yeah, where I am, like literally?
Literally.
Okay, literally. I live, so my name is Lisa Stanton. On the socials, I go by Dr. Lisa Stanton. I have a PhD in social psychology. We were chatting a bit before. It's not in clinical psychology. That sometimes gets lost in translation. But I always studied health behavior. My dissertation is on health behavior. So I had this big interest in sort of studying what was going wrong with me, but not in a clinical sense, just while studying populations. And now I am in Minnesota, about 30 minutes from Minneapolis. My husband and I just jumped on the rural bandwagon. So we live on 10 and a half acres. building a big pole barn, doing
Yes.
the whole deal. Yeah. And at the moment, I'm actually, in terms of like work life, kind of at this impasse. I had a book that just came out, which I'm sure we'll talk about later. And I'm also actually maybe going back into full-time diabetes research. So
wow. I
the
mean,
whole deal.
yeah.
What's going on?
So by the way, when you did your 10 acres, did you literally just be like, oh, Minnesota's got some cheap 10 acres? Or like, why Minnesota?
We were here already. So we already lived in Minneapolis, but we lived in a suburb in a townhouse. And then, I don't know, men evidently just have these dreams about like giant pole barns to hold all of their stuff.
Yes.
So my husband has had this dream and he hopes that I would come in on the dream, and I have embraced the dream to the point that we bought a house in 1988 and I have agreed to make no internal changes for at least 5 years so that we can put all of our money to the pole barn thing. So
I like
that's marriage.
I like your husband. I like him because I too have these dreams. I too search on realtor.com and send my wife houses that we can't afford with plenty of land and places for screaming goats. That's our dream. My wife wants a screaming goat that when it screams, it then makes the fainting goats that we don't have but will have faint. So that's her dream. And if that's what gets me the land, I'm like, great, bring on the goats.
Great.
So you have a fascinating story. So first of all, what's the name of your book? Tell people the name of your book.
Yeah, my book. I wonder if I have on here. So it's funny. I want to, without throwing my publisher under the bus, it is called 52 Life-Changing Lessons I Learned in Recovery. I don't think it's the best title in the world. And I keep getting this feedback of people being like, I'm so surprised by what I found in here. It's so much better than I imagined, which I appreciate. And also feel like maybe it wasn't the best title, but this is the book. This is the title, 52 Life-Changing Lessons I Learned in Recovery. So yeah, that's the book.
And did you have a working title? What were you calling it when you were writing it?
The Things I Wish I'd Known. And then that was the subtitle.
See, I think The Things I Wish I'd Known is so much better as well, as someone who's just gone through the titling process on my own book. So we're going to, from here on out, call it The Things I Wish I Knew. The Things I Wish I'd Known is the official title on the Confessions of a Christian Alcoholic podcast. Got me in a weird mood, and I love it. So you sent me the first chapter, I believe, of that book because you had kind of reached out and asked, said you had a story, and I'm like, okay, I'd love to listen to it. And then you sent me the first chapter, and I was like, wow. So I would like our listeners to strap in, buckle up, and I would love for you to tell us the story of you falling into alcoholism, whatever you call it, and then coming out, and especially how Jesus factored into that. So I'm going to just turn it over to you. I'll chase rabbits and interrupt as I always do, but this is a story worth hearing and a story worth telling. So without further ado, Lisa, please tell us your story.
Beautiful. And feel free to interrupt at any time with follow-up questions or whatever. So obviously, my name is Lisa. I was born in Pennsylvania, not in Minnesota. And I feel like what's relevant, because a lot of people sort of disqualify themselves from alcoholism or from a state of drinking that requires true recovery because their family's not alcoholic. And I come from a family that was not alcoholic. Like my dad drinks like half a beer and falls asleep, bless his heart. And my mom, like maybe I saw her like drink a pina colada on vacation, but the ones that are like mostly just a dessert drink that you don't even know if there's actually alcohol in them. Like I never saw either of my parents like change mood because of alcohol. So I come from a family that had a lot of like just kind of like pressure. But again, I don't even know, which I say a lot, if that pressure was actually my parents creating it or just me deciding that like my mom will be happier if I'm perfect. My dad will be happier if I'm perfect. And now like I'm off to the races trying to like get all A's, be a super athlete, like do all of these things. So to kind of go back to the beginning, born to two parents. My mom has a PhD from Princeton. My dad has a master's degree from, I can't remember where, which is really mean because it's probably just because it's like his is in an Ivy League. I don't know where his is from.
See, Dad's is from University of Mankato.
Yeah. Well, there's this joke in my family because my stepmom and my stepdad also have PhDs. So my dad is like the undereducated
wow.
of the family. So everyone, I actually call myself overeducated at this point. My husband, who is a gem from a farm, he only has a high school education, calls me educated beyond my means, which I probably was because no one's too dumb for their own good. A lot of people are too smart for their own good. So I born to this family. I have one older sister. And then when I was about 5, my parents got divorced. And that was kind of the first time where I remember experiencing like anything in particular, I would say. Like, I think I was just kind of going along up until then. That is definitely like a flashbulb memory seared in my head. And one of the first times that I remember just being like, it's fine, I'm fine, everything's okay. It has been pointed out to me by beautiful mentors in recovery that people don't just wake up one day and be like, you know what, it's been a good run, but like, I think we should get divorced, right? Like there's always like a lot of stuff that's going on before that. And even though I was too young to have words for that, like I experienced probably like a lot of tension, a lot of like, I think I would remember if my parents ever like yelled at each other in my presence. But just there's a lot of like walking on eggshells as a kid that comes with parents that aren't getting along, and that I could probably sense that.
You know, I'm so glad you brought that. In my own, in my own recovery and in my own work, I have realized, this is a recent realization. I actually haven't even spoke this to anyone yet. So here you go. That I've realized is, and I talk about this a little bit in my book, that I think for a long time I said my parents' divorce didn't affect me. And yet, as I'm working through being an alcoholic, especially in that first year after, and I'm working through this stuff, I'm realizing, oh my gosh, like it did affect me, right? And then, so I was, for the last year and a half, I was saying, okay, it did affect me, right? And yet what I just realized recently is exactly what you said. It didn't just affect me in the aftermath and the fallout, even though that's all I have words for, right? But I was literally just thinking about what you said, which is, I was 3 when my parents got divorced. My dad, had an affair, and my parents stayed together, but then it happened again. Like, and so I was like, dang, I wonder how much stuff I was internalizing from 0 to 3 that I may not have memories of, but certainly was there. And then I think about, just all these stuff that I've experienced, and I'm like, oh my gosh, yes, absolutely. So I'm so glad you said that.
Yeah. I feel like you should talk to my husband because he has a very similar experience. And it's also when he's like younger than he can remember. And he's gone through a whole healing process with that. But yeah, it's that stuff that we can't even fully remember. But what's interesting, which I'll kind of circle back to probably eventually, is that like, some anger started there that then like I carried that anger. If you asked me, same as you, about my parents' divorce, I would have been like, no, it was super amicable. Everything was fine. But then when I like really started doing the work, I was like, no, I'm actually so mad at them. And even just like accessing that anger. And then of course, like eventually realizing God exists and understanding that like I'm going to need forgiveness for that anger, and that there's like a huge amount of grace that can come from that. But only if I admit that I really am angry about it. I can't get that grace if I say I'm fine.
Yeah, that is so good. Yeah. Yes. Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
So anyway,
keep going.
They get divorced. And it's super interestingly also actually leading up to their divorce, just because we're on this kind of like moment. My mom actually remembers whenever I was alone with her, like in the car, I would always ask her where her ring was. I'd be like, Mom, do you have your ring? Do you have your ring? And she was like, it was the weirdest thing because your dad and I were not getting along. But like, how did you even know that like a wedding ring was symbolic of whether we're getting along? Like, there's too many pieces to even really piece together what was going on. But like, something weird was going on with me even as a child. So clearly I was noticing something, because otherwise it's very weird to just suddenly start asking my mom like where her ring is. So anyway, kids pick up on that stuff. So they get divorced. And that was kind of my first major, I don't know, like a moment where I feel like I just decided that I was okay.
And how old were you?
About 5.
Okay.
My sister like burst into tears in this moment, and I didn't do anything. And to the point where my mom and dad were like, does she get it? Does she like know what's happening here?
Yeah.
And then I eventually just like asked them if I'm going to have 2 houses now. And that is actually interesting in and of itself, because I went to, I was in kindergarten at this like relatively expensive private school where I would end up going kindergarten through 12th grade, like a day school, prep school type of thing. And my family was like, we had obviously enough money to send me to a kindergarten that cost 10 grand or whatever it cost at the time. But like there were like the really rich kids of my town went there, and they all had like a beach house and a regular house and a this house and I only had 1 house. So I literally took on that moment to be like, it's fine. I have 2 houses. I'm going to fit in at school now. So there was already just like a lot of that, what I understand later as like insecurity, but like self-centeredness was already coming up. Like I'm already self-absorbed into what other people think about me, even that young.
Yeah.
So Lisa's already
and bypassing in a way.
An alcoholic. Yeah.
The bypassing starts. We've talked about spiritual bypassing, but there's other ways to bypass, right? Emotional bypassing. And so I think that's a way to bypass it, right?
Yeah. So I decided that I was fine. And then I feel like I kind of went along with that. I would say that what I now understand to be alcoholism, which is just like a separation from reality, which is God, that like I needed to soothe in some way. Yeah. Right. So like I was now like on this ball of insecurity. Now I'm not getting along well with kids at school, right? Because I'm thinking too hard about myself. I'm thinking about what they're going to think about me, whatever. And now I'm like, obviously not making friends that easily, right? Because I'm thinking too hard. I'm not just being a kid. So that kind of like snowballs into, I had like one good friend in 3rd grade. And then in 5th grade, I'd made friends with this kid, John. His parents were also divorced. We were kind of like AIM chat buddies. Like we didn't really like communicate at school. But then like at night, you're like on AIM, like taking up the family's phone line, because you and I are both old enough that there was a time where like you couldn't just be on the internet and be on the phone.
Oh yeah. Right. Yeah. Exactly.
You had to cut off all of mom's evening phone calls to chat.
Yep.
So I'm like on AIM all the time. And then over kind of winter so it was February, right before Valentine's Day, when I was in 5th grade, we got a phone call that his mom had murdered him and then committed suicide. Oh, so like,
my goodness,
clearly a lot of mental health stuff going on. And like at this point now, I can like tell the story like I just told it, and like have so much compassion for where she had to be mentally to like, you cannot murder your own child and then commit suicide unless you're like profoundly mentally ill. And I can now talk about it without like great emotion, but because I've actually processed that emotion, actually prayed about that emotion, actually understood the immense amount of anger that I had toward her and gone to God with that. At the time, I just said I was fine, right? Yeah. And just like moved on to the next thing. So I talked about it pretty normally then. I'm like, is this my cold or is this me actually needing to process more? But I'll check that.
We look for the things
later. I was like, that's interesting. So I basically just decide that I'm fine and then keep moving forward. But that was kind of the next major like shutdown moment in my life that I can recognize. And what's interesting is shortly after that, going into 6th grade, I like woke up one day and everyone decided like Lisa's pretty now, she can have friends. And I didn't get any less self-centered. I didn't get any less socially awkward, but I did suddenly have a group of friends who were cool and I could sit with them. Of course, every single day I'm terrified that I'm going to like not have friends when I wake up the next day because right, none of the insecurity was gone. I just like got propelled into this position of friendship, I guess. I don't even know if I would call it. Like there was real friendship in it, but it was just like such a confusing time to be inside of my head.
Yeah.
And that friend group is eventually how I end up drinking for the first time. And I feel like what the epitome of like my first drink is there was just all of this like insecurity, confusion, anger, like that I had suppressed, bypassed, like whatever you want to call it, all of it. And it's like waiting for me to take my first drink, right? I'm just like, and up to that point too, like things were coming off at the seams. Like my husband, he's in recovery too, which is why I keep referencing things he says. But he's always like, if you like keep the cap on the toothpaste and squeeze hard enough, it's gonna come out. And I had kept the cap on the toothpaste, and it was getting squeezed. And like I had been diagnosed with, I had a sticker phobia when I was little, like absolutely terrified of stickers. You put a sticker anywhere near me, I would throw up, like terrified.
Wow. I was the same with cotton balls.
Really?
Yeah, like, and I'm not joking. Like, seriously, like, people would want to torture me, and I still have a phobia of cotton balls. I can't touch it.
You just like don't love them. I
feel
that way about stickers. Like, I'm kind of through it, but like, I don't love them.
Yeah.
Like, if I just see like a dirty one on the ground, I'm like, can someone else pick that up? I'd really rather not.
One of the things I've had a couple of root canals recently, and one of the things that kept me from going to the dentist when I needed to is because I couldn't stand the thought of having cotton in my mouth, believe it or not. And it like literally, did bad things to my teeth because I wasn't going to the dentist.
So
isn't that crazy? Yeah. So I get it.
I've never met another person with a weird phobia. So yeah, so toothpaste is on the tube. That phobia happened. I also had separation anxiety disorder. It's a name for like when you have nightmares that one of your parents is going to die. And this happened to be my mother. So I would have these like meltdowns whenever I went to my dad's house. So just some like weird stuff is happening. I will say, meanwhile, like the religious part of my life or spiritual part of my life was quite confusing as well as a kid. My mom, to this day, is still pretty agnostic. She actually edits everything that I write, which is really helpful and interesting because she like doesn't believe that God exists. So she can read it for like, does this like way of thinking make sense? If that makes sense.
Interesting.
And it actually, I mean, obviously, Mom, if you're listening, I don't mean it like in a mean way, but like obviously I'd prefer if she like found faith, but at the same time, it's like so interesting to have that perspective of being like, I don't like believe that you have to confess your sins, but I can like understand what you have written if I did. So that was true even then.
Well, Mom, if you are listening, like it's coming.
Jump on the bandwagon.
Just saying.
Yeah, so that was true even then. And then my dad has kind of like been all over the place. So we went to church some, but we changed churches a bunch of times, just like different Protestant denominations for the most part. And then when I was older, he like told us our whole family's actually Jewish on my mom and dad's side. So then he actually like fully goes to synagogue Torah study now. Since October 7th, he's like doubled down on just like he's fully Jewish. But when I was in my 20s, I went on birthright because my family's very Jewish.
Wow.
So like just confusing kind of, if that makes sense, as a kid. When you don't have adults being like, this is the way, you're just like, if you guys are confused, you think I'm supposed to not be confused?
Yeah. You're like, we need a Mandalorian this. Like, we need a way. Come on.
Somebody tell me what's going on. So by high school, I was just kind of like over it, if that makes sense. I was like, these people are nice. They're kind of like weird and conservative and like, oh, they're sweet people, but I don't really get anything else that's going on here. And so anyway, that's all happening. I want to go back to my first drink because it's just like,
was that in 6th grade?
No, so it was in 8th grade. Summer after 8th grade.
Yeah, very much so.
Yeah, but I was way older.
Yeah. Totally.
So I hadn't paid attention in health class, which is about to make a difference here. My friend called me. So we were now this like group of 8th grade girls, but like had the attention. I went to a very small school, so having the attention of older men is not like that cool, but it's a little cool. Had the attention of some of the high school boys who we were like hanging out with, and they drank. And two of my friends had called me, and they're like, "We're having people over, whatever. We're drinking. You should drink." And I'm like, "What do you mean I should drink?" And they're like, on the phone on our little Nokia things, and they're like, 12 ounces, and just like hang up the phone. I'm sure they were holding like a can of Coors Light, right? And they were like, I don't know, we both just drank 12 ounces. So the only alcohol that was in my dad's house, which is where I was whiskey. So I took out a measuring cup, measured 12 ounces of whiskey because I thought I was supposed to drink 12 ounces.
Wow.
And then put it in like one of those opaque A6 water bottles. And drank it on the 1 mile drive to my friend's house. My sister drove me. And obviously threw up everywhere, like minutes after arrival, because at that point, I'm on a screen, but now I'm probably like 5'6", but back then I was like maybe 5 feet tall, probably weighed not that much. Chug this thing, throw up everywhere. But here's what's funny. So my body absorbed enough of it that I got very drunk, even though I threw up a lot of it. If I absorbed all of it, I would have just died. So I'm happy that didn't happen. But enough stayed in that I had this like browned out night where like very vague memories, like being in the bathroom, running into the wall, like not being able to pull up my pants, laughing, but like the best memories, right? I was like, this is the best day ever. I got to do this again, because it was the first time that like all of that tension just dissolved.
Oh, Lisa. Oh my gosh. Like, I can't wait for, I'm obviously going to send you a copy of the book, but like that is almost exactly, I mean, besides the 12 ounces part, but, when you describe what you felt, that's like my first time drinking. I was probably, I was like 12, 13, which is probably by around 8th grade, right?
Yeah. I think I may have been like 14.
Okay. And so I go on a hunting trip. I kill my first deer. I'm, back in the house with the older guys, and it's a rite of passage. So I get to drink wine, and I drink and I drink and I drink, and I do throw up all over the place that night. And yet it was like my home life was a mess. My sister was tearing us apart. I had a stepdad at the time that was dealing with his own issues. And it was the first time I remember, oh my gosh, I can just be. The thoughts are not racing. The worries are gone. And even though I threw up, and even though it was awful, it was like, I remembered. And that was like, oh my gosh. And so to hear you describe it, you're the first person I've heard describe it, in just such similar terms.
Yeah. Sad for both of us, but cool for both of us.
Yeah. I mean, what that hath wrought. We'll be right back after this. Okay. So that was your first time.
Yeah, so that was my first time drinking, and it took a little while to like find alcohol back then. We used to buy it from this guy in Deer Park water bottles at the end of a cul-de-sac, right? So it's still...
Because what is this? Is this like the late 90s, early 2000s?
This was like 2000, or no. Yeah, 2000. I graduated high school in 2009, so it's like 2003.
Yeah. Okay.
Can't do math that fast.
You're a doctor of psychology, not of.
I know
not of
the
math.
the computers do the math for me. I'm like, my doctoral minor is in quantitative methods and statistics, and I can't do subtraction in my head, but that's okay.
I don't know how I graduated statistics in college.
The computer does it.
Yeah.
So it's hard to find early on. There was like a guy who would sell it to us for $20 a bottle in these like the little like Deer Park water bottles, but he was kind of hard to find. I don't know, like cell phones weren't that good. So that was kind of what was happening then. But I would say like any opportunity that I had after that point, I drank, with the caveat that I was so obsessed with people like thinking that I was a good person and thinking that I was smart and thinking that I was athletic, that it was like I had to balance those two things, right? So some people like really fall the whole way right away, like drop out of high school, all of that. I feel like in a weird way, it was actually like my other, I was going to call it mental illness, which it like kind of is, but that like extreme perfectionism, extreme anxiety, like the two things were like at odds with each other, right? It's like
absolutely.
I so badly need this need for approval, and I so badly want to soothe the fact that I'm so self-absorbed to need all this need for approval. And those two things were fighting each other all the way through high school and college. And like the theme of basically like those and that entire time is like drink as much as possible, but like I got all A's. I have 14 varsity letters in 12 seasons in high school because they let me run outdoor track and play soccer at the same time, right? Like everything was just like those two things needed to stay in line with one another. I will say there were places where it was coming out at the seams, even in high school, there was one soccer game. Our team was like really good. I was starting center midfielder, like took our corner kicks. Like I'm a pretty pivotal player on this team. And I took 9 shots of 99 apples before the game where I was starting because I was like, this is going to be an easy game. Let's make it a little more fun. But I like overdid it a little bit, obviously, like overshot the mark because I was like, well, I should drink a lot now because the game's going to be like 2 hours long.
Yeah. Drunk
in
math.
my mind. Drunk math. But yeah, I almost got in a lot of trouble. Somehow it like, we decide it's food poisoning and it all just like kind of fades away. But I had started drinking a lot like at school, like just like a few shots here and there and only in the afternoon when like clubs and kind of random stuff was all that was left. I could be a little drunk during soccer practice. I found out like taking a couple of shots took the edge off of cross country practice when we had really hard days. At this point, I also was full blown in an eating disorder, which is, I don't know how common it is among like men alcoholics, but female alcoholics, super common to have both going at the same time.
I've heard that.
So it's just like this huge mess. Like I first was anorexic. So I went from 115 to 88 pounds in like 4 months, my sophomore year of high school. Got sent to a little bit of psychotherapy treatment stuff for that, but basically just like gained a little bit of weight back and said I was fine. Just how I do with everything. So that's kind of like the double life that I end up leading in high school. I go to college in Virginia at University of Richmond. And I went there, I mean, like to go to school, obviously, but I went to run Division I track and cross country. Mostly because of the eating disorder. I had like an exercise compulsion. So I was running all the time because I wanted to be skinny, but it was fast enough that it got me to play a Division I sport. But pretty soon after I get to college, between like I'm drinking, at this point I was also on like painkillers and there was just like a whole mess of stuff that was going on inside of my body. I'm not really eating. So my leg broke that fall, like my freshman fall. And I always say like my leg broke because I had a stress fracture that I ignored and just like took more painkillers. And then it cracked 3/4 of the way through my shin. But it's not like there was no impact. It was just like malnourishment, alcohol, drugs. My body was like, we have nothing to rebuild.
Yeah.
You're running a million miles a week. Like, what do you want me to do? So I took that opportunity to quit the track team, join a sorority. And then kind of was off to the races in that direction. But again, with that thing of like, I had a 4.0 like most semesters in college. I was scholarship chair of my sorority. Like I would always win like highest GPA in my pledge class, highest GPA of the semester, highest GPA, whatever. Like, and I was constantly on social probation because I would black out when I was supposed to be sober, because I would show up to events where you weren't supposed to be drinking drunk because, right. So it's like this crazy thing where I'm like, getting A's and doing all of this. And then at the same time, I'm like, I had a boyfriend in college, bless his heart, who like, I would just drink and like not show up for like 2 days. And he would be like, where were you? And I'm like, I don't know, fraternity party. And it was, and like that relationship just kept going for a really long time. Which I feel like as alcoholics, we sometimes just like pull in other people who are hurting in different ways. And I think like that was a trauma bond more than anything between the two of us. I'm
glad you said that. Like that, you know, I've heard that term, but I'd forgotten really about it. It's such a good point. I think I have one of those in my past. I'm just going to leave it at that.
Yeah. And he doesn't actually usually come up that much in interviews. So there must be someone out there whenever this comes out who needs to hear this today. But it's so hard to break those off because there's so much like ick in them. Like there's so much need for approval in both directions. Like I don't know what he needed from me, but I like needed the stability of like having a boyfriend, of like he was from a really good family. His parents were still married. Like I loved that about him, right? He was super stable. He was super kind. I mean, he drank sometimes, but like not the way that I did. And then he would have to come on this podcast to tell you what he was getting out of our relationship. But I can tell you it was not like pure unconditional love and stability. And I actually recently was clearing out my inbox and found emails from him from like, 15 years ago or whatever it was. And he's like really hurting in them in ways that I didn't even remember. Just trying to be like, I want to love you. And I like don't even understand what's going on.
Wow.
which shows again, like for him to want to stay in that confusion, there must have been stuff going on with him too. But it was just like, that was college, was me like trying to cling on to this relationship and just being a pain in the butt, getting A's, and then just like being drunk. Blackout Lisa was my nickname in college.
Wow.
Everyone called me Lisa Pizza because of the Little Caesars commercial, which doesn't even totally make sense, but it was like Lisa Pizza was like my alter ego when I was drinking.
I will say this, you in talking about this, I think it is so important. The trauma bond stuff. I mean, the just everything you're saying, I just want to like affirm, like, thank you for being, honest about it. Thank you for being open about it. And I don't think it's any mistake that you said that, like, maybe there is, I don't really normally say this. And I think there's someone that maybe needs to hear this. And it's like, yeah, it may just be me, right? Like, I've been trying to make sense of this relationship that I've had. And it's not a male-female relationship. It was like a good friend. And there's like, I've never fully understood like what happened, why it ended the way it did. And you're helping me. This is like a little mini therapy session. So thank you. So continue. You can continue. I just wanted to say that.
It's interesting. You saying that makes me think of another thing that I don't often say, but it's interesting because it kind of came across, my Substack today too. And I ended up sitting down and writing about it. And it's accountability, especially like in this college setting, like the accountability of, I try to make sure that if I'm going to tell my story, if I'm going to, not like the whole story, but then also the pieces of the story, that I'm not ready to tell a piece of a story until I'm ready to understand how it was my fault, because it's not healing for me to tell you how it was someone else's fault. That's just me asking for pity, me asking for you to jump in my anger with me.
Wow.
Or like splitting the guilt. I've heard, I could keep bringing up my husband, but he's wise. He calls it splitting the guilt. So if I'm angry and I can get you to agree that I should be angry, then I get to split that pain with you, but no one's actually healing. I've just like brought you in on that. And I've been thinking about that. I read this article today that was about a girl who like went to a fraternity party and blah, blah, blah. And instead of telling her story, like my own story about college, right, is there were so many situations where I would like go to a fraternity party, like wearing something that like wasn't me or whatever, right? Like something sluttier than I would have dressed if there was no influences, right? Or like with a guy who was behaving in a sketchy way and I knew it, or whatever. Like there's this whole story. And what I think is so interesting is I read it and it was a good reminder to me, because she doesn't take any accountability, right? The entire story is about why this guy is the problem. And I was like, I'm not ready to talk about college. I'm not ready to talk about fraternity life, which I do talk about it now. But until I'm ready to say, like, did I end up in situations that at the time I was like, I was sexually assaulted, this guy's the problem, right? I even told my boyfriend, because I had this boyfriend. So if I accidentally sleep at a fraternity party, I was certainly sexually assaulted, because how could I have done that myself? And it's like, there's no healing in that. There's only blame in that. There's only victimhood in that. And the healing for me has come by sitting down and being honest with myself and being like, I wanted approval so badly that I dressed like that I gave that guy that particular form of attention, that I wanted to drink a lot. So for some people it'd be, I drank as much as I did. For me, I was going to do that anyway.
Yeah.
But these situations that there's so much healing in looking and being like, this actually was my fault. I placed myself in a position to be hurt. Was I hurt? Is he wrong? Sure, that's between him and God. That's not between him and me. That's between him and God. He may want to go to his maker and figure that out himself. But there's been so much healing for me that has come from society tells me that I get to blame all these other people for all these situations. And it wasn't just college, right? It was also in my 20s, going out in downtown places, wherever I live, that like the healing didn't come until I sat down and I was like, I wanted approval so badly that I placed myself in a position to be hurt over and over and over again.
So how do you respond to people who say, oh, you've just learned to victim blame yourself?
People have said that. So here's the thing. I feel like if you victim blame yourself, you stay in pain. You know what I mean? There's not that like unlocking with Jesus moment. And it's not that it's just coming to this realization of like, oh my gosh, I wanted this so badly that like this is what happened. It's really going to God and being like, I was jealous of how much attention the girls who dress like that were getting. Right. And then like I was jealous of like the guys that were giving them attention and I learned how to flirt like they did. I was jealous of, you know, like those things, or being like, I was showing up in lust, and it's not that fun to be like, I was showing up in lust. And the interesting thing about lust is that like, my husband and I teach like a sex conduct workshop, at a church up here. And I mean, it's not 100% like men do this and women do this, but like what I've noticed over time is that like when men are lost in the throes of lust, they're normally like objectifying women or men or whatever they're doing. When women are lost in the throes of lust, we're actually forming ourselves to be the objects. And so like to the extent that I'm forming myself in my life around being the object of that, I'm actually like super lost, which is terrifying if you don't have a relationship with Jesus, to be like, I'm bringing this to you because it needs healing. Right. So then I'm stuck in this place of victimhood. Like everything is my fault. What do I do? But when I can bring that to Jesus for healing, then I'm in this place of freedom. And I'm also in this place of like, when I don't show up with that energy, when I don't dress like that, when I don't go to those places, guess what's never happened to me since then?
Wow. Yeah. The other thing I want to say too is this part of your story I think is important. This part that you're talking about, and I would say also men, that doesn't give you an excuse to objectify as well. Like, I'd like the cycle to stop with you, man. But I want to go back to something you said too as well, and that is, you know, in a very similar way, I got drunk that first time, and I did not really drink much until I then turned 21, and for me, my first book was about anxiety and OCD and my diagnosis. I was undiagnosed at that time. And so my fear, my OCD and my fear and my ruminations, I remember when I got drunk that first time, I had convinced myself that I had killed someone. And people are like, what? And I'm like, well, that's the OCD. Like, I literally believed that, like, I would go check that local paper up in the Northwoods of Wisconsin and look for if there was anyone who had murdered someone, and if they were looking for them, because I blacked out, right? And so even though there was that release of tension at the time, it was then quickly filled with a lot of fear and anxiety and ruminations. And so, I mean, it was probably a week, and then a week of consistently checking the paper to see who I had killed, and then a month went by before I could stop checking the paper, which at that point you would like physically check the paper. And so I think it's interesting. Like, you had this dichotomy of like, I'm perfect Lisa, but then there's Lisa Pizza, right? And there's blackout Lisa. And for me, there was that John who got drunk, and then I kept it in a sense in check, but I didn't keep it in check for the right reasons, right? I kept it in check because I was so scared, not because I didn't want it. And there were some still like drinking that happened. I mean, especially in Wisconsin growing up, like it's legal, you know, if you're with your parents. And my parents, you know, it's kind of hard to explain this. My parents, who were, you know, Christ-fearing people, you know, it's like you're at Christmas or you're out, they're like, hey, do you want a beer? It's like, that's just the culture that I grew up in. And so it wasn't that I never drank, but I don't think I ever got drunk again until I was 21 and in college, until I turned 21 in college. And so I think, you know, people hear your story, they hear my story, and I think we can make these comparisons and say, well, at least I wasn't doing this, or I kept it in check here. And yet, you know, maybe you weren't getting blackout drunk every couple of days like Lisa, and maybe you kept it in check out of fear like me. And guess what? We're both the same person. Like, we both ended up in the same place. And so I just want to make sure to call that out.
Yeah. Yeah, you definitely, I mean, there's a part of my story later, I feel like I should speed it up a little bit, but where like I don't drink for 44 days.
Yeah.
That's for me, that was a long time.
Yeah, because alcoholics can't do that. They can't stop for 45 days.
Right? That didn't mean anything. I blacked out the next time I drank again.
Yeah.
And I kept it in check because I needed to finish my dissertation because it was the end of grad school and I wasn't going to graduate if I didn't do it. So put enough fear in me, right? And I can stop.
So, okay, so let's reset then. So you are in college, you're blacking out, you're Lisa Pizza, you're blackout Lisa. Yeah. And is there anyone at this point in your life who's like, hey, like, this doesn't feel normal? Is there anyone who's kind of saying anything like that?
I feel like there was two serious ones. So back in high school, I had a friend who basically said, I'm not going to stay and watch you die, and went to boarding school. So that was like a pretty serious kind of intervention of sorts. But she didn't like alert the troops, if that makes sense. She just kind of like said to me, like, in not too many words, like, it's kind of your fault that I don't want to be here anymore. She was like my best friend since 7th grade.
We'll be right back after this.
But senior year of college was the first kind of like real intervention where someone actually said like, hey, I think you're an alcoholic and I think that you're going to have to deal with this. And it was two friends of mine from college. One of their dads was actually in recovery for like 40 years or something. Wow. And so they kind of like tricked me. I think they said we were going to get coffee or brunch or something on a Sunday morning, and then pulled into this parking lot and said like, they just laid out exactly what I'd done the day before, which I had no recollection of, and said like, and it's not just yesterday, like this is the final straw. Like this is so bad. Like basically you need to do something or we can't even be friends anymore. And they didn't say it exactly that way. So we drove to a recovery meeting. They had found one. I wanted to go like really far away from campus. I don't know who I thought I was going to see. But we drive to a recovery meeting, and then that's kind of like where that story ends. Is we leave and I'm like, I don't think I'm an alcoholic. Like those people are crazy. I'm just like having a time in college. I'm not like those people. And my friends kind of agreed, right? We're 22-year-old girls, and it's just not like the people in that room were not 22-year-old girls who were in a sorority, who were in college. They were just like, I mean, we drove to rural Virginia. I don't blame them, but like, it's like I thought I was going to drive to rural Virginia and then see like 16 of me sitting in that room. That doesn't even make sense.
And because we use anything as justification, because you didn't.
Right. Because I didn't, then I'm not an alcoholic. Everything's fine. Right. So that was kind of the end of that road for a little bit. I then went straight from undergrad. So I had done a bunch of research in undergrad with professors, and had even gotten some things published, and that was enough to get straight into a PhD program. So I moved to Minnesota to start my PhD at 22 years old, right? So everyone's like, wow, she's doing amazing, right? On the outside, things are still going fine. Minnesota is ranked, depending on the year, like in the top 5 schools for a PhD in psychology. So like, why Minnesota? It's one of those just like rogue, like I got into Duke first, and this was a far better place to go.
Yeah, wow.
So I'm doing great on the outside. Moved to Minnesota, and then kind of watched that same, like those two main drivers happen again. The main difference in Minnesota was when I was in college, I was surrounded by people who maybe were not alcoholics, although a couple of them are sober now. But they were all drinking a lot. They were all doing drugs. We were all snorting each other that well, right? Like it was just, that's what was happening. I moved in with other PhD students who were like regular people in grad school. And so when they started to see the way that I drank, the way that I took medicine, the way that I did drugs, they were kind of like, whoa, like, I appreciate that you're really good at school, but like, what is happening? The way that I interacted with men, like I would say that probably that male approval thing was another main like area. Like they were not just like getting drunk and bringing random people home because they weren't seeking approval from the outside world in that way, right? If I need to be validated that I'm pretty and exist by bringing random men home, I'm going to bring them home all the time. If you're a regular person who's not suffering from that, you're like, what is she doing?
Yeah.
So I got some kind of like more better. So that's more better feedback about my behavior for one of the first times. And I feel like the way that I dealt with that was by spending less time at home, which is, so I like found boyfriends where I would stay at their house, where they were partying kind of more like my college friends, where that was more normalized. And I just spent less time, I feel like, showing them the behavior that I was having. And I found people who more normalized the type of behavior I was. And I would say at the same time, even those boyfriends eventually broke up with me because they're like, dude, what are you doing?
Yeah. So
it's kind of hard to see that. I feel like one of the peaks, I don't know why everything I don't talk about that much is coming out today, but I actually wrote about it. Yeah. I wrote about this recently for the first time, but I don't talk about it that much, is like 2017. And I don't get sober till 2020 is when I started trying. 2017, I like got drunk one night, was on a bunch of drugs, and was like walking around Washington Avenue, which is kind of like a main going out street in Minneapolis, like by myself at 4:00 in the morning. I don't even know how I got there. The police like start to interact with me. I just like freak out. They luckily end up taking me to a psych ward instead of to jail. They could have easily just been like, this is public intoxication. I proceed to start yelling at people in the psych ward. They end up having to like sedate me, restrain me, like because I'm screaming about my cell phone. Like it's just crazy. But it's like even those things, when you talk about kind of like, were there interventions? Was there signs that like things were going wrong? Like I've been hospitalized a couple times before, casual. I've been hospitalized a couple times before for just like drinking too much, but I hadn't been like restrained in a psych ward. And even then, I think it's why I'm so big on accountability is like, I woke up the next morning and could have like explained, you could have put me in a lie detector and I would have explained to you how it was everybody else's fault that happened. Yeah. Right? That was not my fault. That was a one-off thing. Why did my friends leave me? If my friends hadn't left me, I wouldn't be in this situation. So it was like always everyone else's fault.
And I think, you talked about like, we joke a little bit. Oh, I mean, I had been hospitalized before. And yet I think that is such a, like, I don't want to gloss over that because, as I write in my book is like, we all have those Rubicons, right? We say we're never going to cross this, or if I do cross this, this is going to be the marker that I need help, right? And yet it doesn't matter where you are in quote unquote, how bad you are, right? You will cross them. And when you do, they become little creeks behind you, little, little things that you're like, oh, well, that I can explain that, right?
Yeah.
Or that wasn't that bad, right? And so for you, like some people might be listening to this and they're just like, okay, I think, or, and you're like, okay, well, if I were to get hospitalized for over drinking, that would be my point. That's when I know I have a problem. And I think what I hear you saying is, yep, yeah, sure. And that wasn't, that wasn't it for me, Yeah. And so I think if you're listening to this and you have this like thing in your head, well, if I do that, then, for me, it was like, if I drive drunk, if, then I know I have a problem. How many times I drove drunk and I'm not saying this is like, I'm not proud of it. Right. And for you, it was multiple times getting hospitalized for over drinking. And so if you're listening to this, like, you're going to cross that Rubicon. If you don't intervene, if you don't disrupt the behavior, you will cross that. And it'll just be something in the rearview mirror.
Yeah. Right. Because I never thought that it was going to be bad enough that I would get hospitalized. I never thought that it was going to be bad enough that I would be physically injured, need stitches, like these different like things that came up. And then when it did, it was like, well, I need stitches because I was at a foam party and it was very slippery. Right. I got hospitalized because it was a Valentine's Day social. And so I thought it'd be cute to take 14 shots, right? Like I wouldn't normally do that. So there was like always a reason why I crossed whatever line I crossed.
Yes, absolutely. So you go through, so this is around 20, I think you said 17 is you're high, you're drunk, you're in the psych ward. This to when you finally start, when did you realize, like, was that your, and I say this a lot, you don't have to have a rock bottom moment. Was that your rock bottom moment, or what was it that made you finally say, I think I have a problem?
I think I knew for a long time that I had a problem.
Yep.
Like, I think I knew.
We all do, I think.
I think I knew in 2009 that I had a problem. Like that very first intervention when they brought me to that meeting, I feel like I knew I was going to be back here someday. I never would have admitted it at the time, but I think I knew, I think I knew even then, but I didn't. My biggest problem is that is my intellect, like not even my intellect, my intellectual pride, right? I don't want to say like my intellect itself because God can use intellect for good. But the pride that I had to think that like I know better than everyone else. And that's what kept me sick, is that like, I know. My husband calls it the mantra of a man going insane, is to say, I know. And that's what I was stuck in, is like, I know this isn't good. I know that I can drink less. I know that I can get out of this. And it wasn't like you said, all these markers. It's not the morning drink. I said I was never going to drink in the morning. And then there was a reason I started drinking in the morning. I said, like all these different things. So I feel like for me, there was kind of like a tumbling of the final straws. And the crazy thing is nothing dramatic happened, right? I feel like that 2017 incident was the last kind of like interaction with institutions related to my drinking, if that makes sense. Like there weren't further, I guess I've had other interactions with police, but they usually just bring me home, being a white woman. So there weren't any other kind of like major things that stand out, but I feel like it started to really eat away at me internally. And I like watched my life really spiral, especially once COVID hit and I didn't have to go to work anymore. So I finished my PhD, had moved to Chicago, was a postdoctoral fellow in the Department of Preventive Medicine at Northwestern School of Medicine, working on oncology research, right? Like, again, everything's fine on the outside. And at night, I am literally stacking up multiple Hinge dates in a row, like drinking before I go on the dates, drinking. I have like a happy hour date, a dinner date. Like I would say the extent to which my life became consumed by alcohol and my need for male approval was like, just insane. And then once COVID hit, in the beginning, you were like, details are okay. I mean, like my life was reduced to like going to men's houses, sleeping with them, drinking with them, pretending that like it's almost like I started to live in this grandiose delusion that like this wealthy man that I was having like a 3-day relationship or one night stand with was going to be the one who was going to like save me and pull me out of whatever this was. Like if I can just have a hedge fund husband, I'm going to be okay. And I know that sounds crazy, but I feel like maybe someone else is out there like living in that delusion that like a better life is not going to come from that situation, from being stuck in that like approval cycle. It's not going to come from that. And I think I like was falling into despair, but then trying to pull myself out in this like strange way that made sense to me at the time. And that brings me to April of 2020. I woke up in my apartment. I had gotten also, this is just so silly, but these pristine white sheets. I'd moved to Chicago with this boyfriend who like knew that I had this history of like all these problems. And he was like, we're going to get white sheets and there's going to be this new like purity, whatever. Right. And then like pretty quickly, I like cheated on him while I was drunk. We broke up, blah, 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 whatever. And it brings me to like, now I'm waking up in these like white sheets that were bought for that reason. So drunk, I had wet my own bed, which was common by the end. And I was like, I like have to leave or I'm going to die. Like I just had that thought of like, I have to leave or I'm going to die. And I don't even know that it was like of alcohol poisoning or of whatever. I just was like so caught in this cycle of like not even knowing why life was worth living anymore. And so I got in my car that day, took a shower, got in my car that day and just started driving toward Minneapolis. And I'm from Pennsylvania, so I wasn't driving home. I was just driving like away from Chicago as if Chicago was the problem. And Chicago had been my most recent problem, but it's not like it was the problem. But what's interesting is I went back to Minneapolis and I moved in temporarily with the boyfriend that I had like through most of my 20s, who is high all the time. He owns a bunch of cannabis companies, so he can do whatever he needs to do. But like what's interesting is he was like pretty chill about my drinking because like he's doing his own thing, right? For most of my 20s. And I went back and within like a week of me being there, he was like, you can't, this is crazy. Like you can't be here and do this. Cause he would just like come home in the middle of the day to me like being drunk on box wine, like at 12, like every day. And he was like, you can't live here if you're going to do this. So I went on a bender, as you would if when someone says you can't
because you drink it away.
Drink like this. So there's this lake out here called Lake Minnetonka. It's like a very famous partying lake in the summer. So I go to Lake Minnetonka where there's men and boats and whatever, and just like black out and disappear for 5 days. And then basically that was the end. And I, at that point of partying for 5 days was like not a rock bottom of any like sort of big capacity, if that makes sense. Like I was at such a point that
so
that was
just finding random people to drink with and stay with, and do you remember much of that 5 days?
I remember almost getting a DUI. I was driving in the middle of it. I remember the pool party, like the last pool party that I went to, because I had to drive to it, and I got pulled over. I was wearing like a bikini and a dinosaur sweatshirt, and there was boxes of White Claws in my back seat. And I decided to back up in the middle of an intersection because I thought I could get to this party faster. And it was like 9 a.m., but I had been drinking. Like at that point, I was like in that phase where, like, again, like you said, just because you're not drinking to be alive right now doesn't mean that someday, if you keep drinking, you won't be drinking at 8 o'clock in the morning just to be alive. But I was drinking just, you know what I mean? I woke up and probably had 3 White Claws before I hopped in the car. So it wasn't just last night's drinking. It was like, that was just a function at that point. And I get pulled over, and I'm like, okay, like this is where I go to jail. This is going to be, I'd never been to jail before. This is the final straw. Like this is where I get a DUI, whatever. And the guy comes up to my window. And so this weekend was Memorial Day weekend of 2020 in Minneapolis, which was George Floyd.
Goodness.
And the fires. And like, so the city's like burning down. And I had out of state plates because I was I was a postdoctoral fellow and I was poor. And so my mom still owned my car. So it had Pennsylvania plates on it. And people had been coming from out of town with like large rifles and things to protest or something. So this police officer pulls me over, looks at me in my like dinosaur sweatshirt and bikini. Mind you, I also had like bleach blonde hair back then. Like I just looked whatever. I looked like I was an idiot who was going to a party. And he like leans in the window and was like, license and registration. And I like hand it to him. And he's like, are you going downtown? And then of course, I'm like a little bit drunk. Look at him and I'm like, downtown? I'm going to a pool party. I'm in Minnetonka. Like I'm like telling him where he's at. I'm like, whatever. And he's like, oh, okay. So he goes back. I have a clean driving record. And returns and is like, you're sure you're not going downtown? And I'm like, why would I go downtown? And he's like, we're having a lot of problems with people with out of state plates who are coming in for the protests. And I was like, I'm not protesting. I'm going to a pool party. And he hands me my stuff back and says, okay, have a nice day. So his job that day was just like finding protesters. It was not finding DUI people. My response. So now I'm shaking profusely because I like haven't gotten this DUI. And of course, my response to that is I immediately drive to my friend's house and then like chug like 6 ounces of Fireball to steady my nerves from this interaction. So I didn't drive again that day, stay at that pool party. And then it was that morning, which doesn't even make sense. Like blackout, I wake up, but just like in a bedroom at that pool party, right? There's beer cans everywhere. And I just knew that I was done. And I don't really know how to explain that feeling. I don't believe in God at this point. So it's not like I had this like God moment. I just like knew that this was the beginning of the end and went downstairs. My friend was like drinking wine out of a coffee mug. And he was like, do you want some? Which the answer to that is yes, 100% of the time in the history of Lisa. And I was like, no, I don't think so. And that morning I drove back to like the ex-boyfriend's house where I'd been staying, told him like, I was like, I just went on a 5-day bender. You were right. Something's really wrong. Like I need to sleep this off, but then I'm going to get help. And then I called a friend from college whose husband was in recovery. Asked him what to do. He was like, go to a meeting. I was like, I tried that in college. I'm not doing that. It's like, cool. Then you can die. Like, I don't, what do you want me to do here? So I listened to him and went to a meeting, and that started my journey in recovery. Since that date, I drank one more time on July 4th. So that was June 1st was my original sobriety date. I drank on July 4th for a very particular reason that becomes important, which was that I had taken way too much LSD. So mind you, I had not changed my sobriety date. I didn't believe that drugs counted at this point in my sobriety.
Right.
So,
California sober.
So I'd taken too much LSD on July 4th, and the way to come down from too much LSD is to drink. So I had like a little bit of alcoholic kombucha, decided to reset my sobriety date over that. But I was like, that's the type of program that I was doing at that time, is like just doing my own thing. I believed in the universe. I believed in like, I don't know, the law of attraction, whatever. I'm still absolutely miserable. I'm bulimic. I'm vomiting all the time, but I'm like trying to do these like sobriety. I'm going to a lot of recovery meetings with young people who are also on a lot of meds and like also have eating disorders, and like nobody's actually healing. And that was a really beautiful experience because it brought me to a place of like, sobriety is miserable. Like, this sucks. Why did I get sober? By December of that year, like for 7 months, I'd been trying to get sober and nothing was getting better. And that December is when I finally, like, God, though I wouldn't call it God, had been speaking to me that fall. Like, there's some crazy situations. There's like a few different chapters in my book about it, but like God was working, like this one crazy one. So actually that same ex-boyfriend, his mom had cancer and was dying that fall, like October, November of 2020. And I had like started to be like, okay, I'll like try this like God thing that you guys are doing. And like a little beyond just like praying to the universe. And I decided that I wasn't willing to pray broadly yet, but I was like, Judy's dying of cancer. So I'm going to pray for her. Like, that's a logical thing to ask. God does stuff about people with cancer, right? Like, I'm going to pray for Judy. So I started praying for Judy. And I had learned in recovery that we don't pray for outcomes. We just pray for God's will. So I'm just like praying for God's will for Judy every day. Won't pray for God's will in my own life, but we'll pray for God's will for Judy. And a really weird thing started happening that I did not connect at first, which is I started seeing the number 417 everywhere. And even in my life with God today, he gets my attention sometimes like visually if I just like cannot listen to something that's trying to be said. So I started seeing 417 everywhere. And at first it was like license plates, whatever. And I'm a psychologist, right? I'm like, no, it's that phenomenon where like if someone tells you that they're like looking at Fiats, you never thought you saw Fiat before, and now they're like everywhere. And I'm like, no, that's all that it is. So like up the ante. It's like I would be trying to meditate and I would open my eyes and there'd be like 4 minutes and 17 seconds left on the clock. And then I was listening to this podcast, which the podcast is still on today. It's all new age stuff, right? It's nothing that I even subscribe to anymore, but that's where I was at the time. And I truly believe that like Jesus is now using that to bring me to him, which is nuts. But I'm listening to this podcast in a tanning bed. This tells you everything about where I was at the time. So I'm laying in a tanning bed listening to this podcast, and this girl like sees numbers everywhere, but not in like a God speaking way, in this very like new age astrology like thing. And her number's 202. But it's not like, I guess the difference, because sometimes people are like, God uses numbers. I'm like, I don't think there's an experience where like this girl's number is 202 and she created 202 and she uses 202 everywhere, right? I don't think that happens necessarily in God's world, but I think God can get your attention with things. So I've been seeing 417 everywhere. And I kid you not, I'm listening to this podcast and she's like, so I have to tell you guys about this experience that I've had recently. So everyone knows my number is 202, but recently I've been seeing 417 everywhere. And I like sit up, hit my head on the tanning bed. And I was like,
gosh.
There is no way. And I like roll it back, play it again. And I'm like, okay, I need to like ask someone about this. Like, what does this mean? So I call a friend in recovery, and there's this like main recovery text of the program that we were in. That 417 is this thing called the acceptance prayer, where it's like about accepting like all the things in your life, whatever. And he's like, maybe God's trying to tell you to accept something. And I'm like, okay, like maybe that's what it is. But like, what do I need to accept? What do I, whatever. Judy and me praying is like the last thing on my mind right now. But so that ex-boyfriend, so Judy's son, is also like, in addition to being cannabis, he's super new agey. He's really into astrology, numerology. So I'm like, I'm going to call him. and he's going to tell me what 417 means and like whatever thing he's doing. So I call him and I'm like, I know you're super busy with your mom, but like this crazy thing has been happening and I just like need you to tell me what this means. And there's just this like long silence on the other end of the phone. And he was like, I don't know like numerology wise what this means, Lise, but I can tell you that 417 is my mom's hospital room number. And she died the next day. And I like still had trouble believing in God after that, right? I'm like, this is a coincidence. This has nothing to do with the prayers that I'm praying. This is like, I wish it could be like, and then after that, everything was fine.
Right.
And it's like, God sends us these like, I was going to call it Hail Mary. God sends us these like Hail Marys. And I still like had trouble believing, but I feel like it was the beginning. And Judy also, despite like Dylan having gone kind of a different direction, she actually was like super Christian. So it's funny looking back that like God was using me like right where I was, right? God, whatever they say, God meets you where you're at, but he doesn't leave you where you're at. And so he met me like right where I was in that. And then within basically a month of that, I meet a new group of people in recovery who actually have that like joy in life, and ask them what their secret is. And this guy brought me to a church. Like this one particularly happy guy, I'm like, yo, you have to tell me, like, what are you doing? What prayers are you using? Like, what, like, I got to know, like, the secret sauce.
What crystals are you holding?
Yeah. What is going on here? And so he goes, hop in the truck and I'll show you. And he drove me to a church in the middle of the day. And we like get out and I'm like, what are we doing here? It's like, you're going to redo your third step prayers, like what it is in that program, but like turning your will in your life over to God. And he goes, and you're going to do it in the presence of God instead of in the presence of whatever you've been doing. And it is not as though like sometimes people hear that and they're like, you're telling me I have to go to church. I'm not telling you that you have to go to church, but like, I think for me, God used this person, right, to show me that like I needed to actually surrender. And it wasn't just a Christian church, it was a Catholic church. So like Jesus was hanging in front of me, like on the, it's not a cross, crucifix, right?
Yeah.
So like he's fully there in front of me and I had to like kneel underneath and like look up and be like, okay, I guess they're really doing this, right? And all those thoughts are in my head. Well, what about the wars? What about my family's actually Jewish? I can't be here doing this one. Like all of the things came up and I still had this faith of like, I just have to like fully let this go. And that date is my actual sobriety date. So after that date, I didn't do any more illegal drugs. I still had some prescriptions that for the next couple of weeks I would slowly get off. That's probably a whole point of contention for another day, but I don't take any, even like I used to be on psychiatric, like actual prescriptions that someone thought were the right thing to prescribe me. I don't take any of them anymore. I know everyone has their own journey with that. But I could feel like God telling me basically like, honey, you lied to get on those to begin with. Like, we're done here. Or that like they were remnants of like the spiritual damage. They weren't something that I like organically needed. And I can't speak to anyone else's anything. I just tell people that is your own journey with God and like that's your thing. But so that was January 4th, 2021. And then from that day, that's like when everything in my life slowly started to change. But I feel like it's important. We were talking at the beginning when I was like, who are the people who are listening? Like for me, I used to not believe in God and then I did, right? So that's a big change. But like believing in God doesn't get me to a place of faith, doesn't get me to a relationship with God, doesn't get me like, if you look at my life, it's not like I believe in God. It's like I started from a place of like, if I believe in God, then I believe in capital T truth. Like I believe that there is truth and I believe that there is wrong and there is right. And therefore I have a bunch of stuff that I now need to go tell God about.
Yeah. Right.
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 And that was a big, okay, well, if God already saw everything, then why do I have to let him know? And it's like, I'm not letting him know what happened. I'm letting him know that I now understand that I was wrong for what happened.
Yeah.
Right. He can see me. He can see my sex conduct. I've already talked about that here. He can see my sex conduct. He knows I did that. I know I did that. He knows I did that. Until I actually went to him and said like, I was wrong for that. That's where the release comes. And I feel like that's the piece that people miss a lot in the confession is I'm not confessing that I did it. I'm confessing that I understand that me doing that separated me from God and that I want to like remedy that separation.
Yes.
So that was like one huge, really cool thing. And I feel like the other thing with that, like months and months of reconciliation early on, and to be fair, I have a daily practice of reconciliation even today, but was to see even the nuanced things, right? Like I have people all the time be like, you're telling me I can't be angry at anyone? And I'm like, okay, if you have like a 30 minutes, let's say, I'll give you 30 minutes of anger that can pass through you, that's like a healthy expression of emotion, 100%, like you get that. Maybe I'll give you like an hour. For me, if I'm angry for longer than an hour, I am holding on to unforgiveness. I'm holding on to a grudge. I'm holding on so like that's the level that I was confessing at. And to see things that other people kind of like let fly by. So like so the recovery program and talks about resentments, fancied or real. And what I think is so important about that is that like if I'm holding on to anger about something real, right? So like someone actually wronged me. I'm holding on to anger about that. That's easier to be like, okay, two things. I need to forgive them and I need to go to God so that I get forgiveness for the fact that I just held a grudge for 5 years or whatever it is. Fancied are so interesting, but I feel like so impactful. That's when like I had a resentment toward my mom that she wouldn't love me if I didn't achieve certain things in like education. My mom doesn't believe that. Right. But like I was functioning out of that resentment in these areas of my life. And so I still went to God and was like, please take away like this anger that I have. It's almost like a chip on your shoulder type of anger. But I feel like some of those were actually more impactful to recognize them and then like bring them to God. A lot of big societal ones people have like in that category, like being mad about like beauty standards, right? Like if I am mad that beauty standards exist, which, right, I had an eating disorder, I have to be mad that beauty standards exist. Like that's something that I need to take to God. That's not just something that I'm allowed to like have and carry around. So I feel like that was really the biggest part of like, when you talk about like, yes, I have to come to believe in order to do that. But like the implications of coming to believe are not just I believe God exists. It's now like I have to reconcile my life with the truth that is presented to me in Scripture.
My goodness. This is so good. I mean, there's so many things I want to say. I'll say this because I know we're getting towards the end here, but I think your story is one thing that I've become so passionate about, and that is, you tried sobriety for 7 months, and I've told people this, like, can you have sobriety without Jesus? Of course you can. There's plenty of people that do it. I wouldn't recommend it. I don't think it's the best sobriety, and I don't think you get an abundant, fulfilled life. And so what I tell people is, I have an article that I wrote that said, like, how did you stop drinking? It was like, I finally stopped trying to stop drinking. And it was, I finally shot for Jesus, right? Like I hit my rock bottom and then I finally shot for Jesus. And then I got sobriety thrown in. I don't, there's a quote too that I love from Mother Teresa. She says, my call is not to serve the poor. My call is to follow Jesus. And I followed him to the poor. And I take that in sobriety and say, my call is not to sobriety. My call is to Jesus, and I have followed him into sobriety, and then I've gotten so much more than sobriety as a result. And there are some people that clutch their pearls, and they're like, oh my gosh, and I can't, you don't want people to just like, stop drinking. I'm like, no, I want them to stop drinking. It's like shoot for the moon, and then you land them on the stars, and so I just, there's so many aspects of your story that I think are so good. And I actually think we need to do a part 2. I think we need to have you on again. And because this first one was just all about your story, and I think
I just kept talking too. So
no, this is great. But I think there's a ton of other stuff that we can cover that you've now learned from being in sobriety. And so we're gonna have a part 2 on this. I don't know if you know this. I just declared it. We're having a part 2. Of what you've learned in since getting sober, because this first one is just so So good. Lisa, if people want to connect with you, if they want to get your book, if they want to read what you're doing, where should they go?
The easiest place is my website, which is drlisastanton.com, because then you can connect to Substack, you can connect to Instagram. There's a list of podcast interviews that you'll be able to find this one on then. There's a link to buy the book there. So drlisastanton.com is probably the best place. Obviously, I'm also on Substack. That's how we met. My publication's called Things on My Heart. But if you just look up Dr. Lisa Stanton, that's what I am everywhere. So Instagram was actually my like original spot. I don't know that I feel as connected to it anymore, but that was where the story began. So, but yeah, website and Substack mostly now.
Lisa, thank you so much for sharing your story. I can't wait for part 2. It's going to be awesome. I just think there are so many people out there who are going to be able to connect with you and who already have connected with you over what you've said. So thank you so much for your radical vulnerability.
Thanks, John.
Man, I am still just so encouraged by that conversation. And, Lisa's been through a lot. And to see where she's ended up and where she's come, I mean, she's gone through... I'm not talking about just like the physical and the mental and the emotional, but even to come to the understanding of faith, right? And, we've talked about this on this show before. If you follow me, that I talk about that sobriety with Jesus is the best type of sobriety. And I've had that conversation even recently with some people. And that's not always a easy thing to fully wrap your head around, right? And so I want to hear, like, if you're struggling, if you're listening to this, like, I want you to stop your active addiction, right? And I think that when you do that, like, if you want to go deep spiritually and if you want to really understand the inner workings of yourself and the universe, yeah, you need to stop drinking first. So do what it takes to stop drinking first, but then go beyond that. So that said, next week, we're going to get into some of the practical tools, some of the practical tips and advice that Lisa has in her book. And I'm really excited about this. And we also talk about some of the stuff that I read. I was like, hey, can you explain a little bit more about this? So we'll get into all of that. Go to christianalcoholic.com, pre-order the book, Confessions of a Christian Alcoholic. There are now some bonuses up there. So if you order and put in your receipt number, you will get some bonuses. And so I'll let you discover what those are. And I'm excited to talk to Lisa again next week. So thanks for sticking around. Thanks to Life Audio, the partner that brings you this podcast. Go to lifeaudio.com and check out more podcasts. Talk to you all next week.